What happens when an abandoned woman transforms her pain into power? When a CEO returns to apologize, only to discover the woman he left behind has become his greatest nightmare. 10 years ago, Richard Castillo walked away from his pregnant wife without looking back. Today, he's about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life: never underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The black BMW rolled to a stop, its polished surface reflecting the afternoon sun. Richard Castillo gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension. This neighborhood, these streets should have triggered memories of decay and desperation. Instead, his eyes landed on something that made his breath catch in his throat. The house stood transformed. Where peeling paint and a dying lawn should have been, there now existed a masterpiece of renovation. A manicured garden burst with color. 3 luxury vehicles gleamed in the garage, their combined value enough to make even Richard, a millionaire several times over, take notice. But it was the gold plaque beside the front door that sent ice through his veins. Camila Johnson Law Firm, Civil Rights Specialist, 10 years. A full decade had passed since Richard had last stood on this street. The woman he'd left behind had been 26, 8 months pregnant, and drowning in shattered dreams. He could still see her face that November morning, the confusion, the betrayal, the raw devastation when she'd found his note. "I can't do this, I'm sorry." 4 words that ended a 2-year marriage. 4 words that, his mother assured him, saved his future. "You can't ruin your life for a girl like her," his mother had said, her voice sharp with certainty. "Think of your reputation, the family business. Your future." At the time, those words had felt like wisdom. Now, staring at the evidence of Camila's incredible transformation, they felt like the greatest mistake of his life. Richard had spent the 3-hour drive from Chicago rehearsing this moment. He'd practiced his apologies, imagined Camila's grateful tears, envisioned himself as the hero returning to rescue the struggling single mother. The latest information he'd gathered from mutual acquaintances had painted a picture of hardship and struggle. Poor thing, still living in the same old house, barely making ends meet. But the woman who opened the door before he even reached for the bell bore no resemblance to that imagined victim. Camila stood in the doorway, and Richard almost didn't recognize her. The broken girl he'd abandoned had vanished, replaced by a woman who radiated power and self-possession. Her business suit was impeccable, her posture confident, her expression controlled. Only her eyes betrayed any emotion, and they held not pain but something far more unsettling. Ice, pure, crystalline ice. "Richard," her voice was calm, measured, nothing like the frightened young woman he'd left behind. "Punctual as always, come in." "Broken heart if you're already hooked on Camila's transformation, wait until you see what she's planned for this reunion." Richard hesitated at the threshold. Something was profoundly wrong with this scenario. During his entire drive, he'd mentally prepared to comfort, to condescend, to offer financial support to his struggling ex-wife. Those carefully rehearsed words now seemed absurd, even insulting. "You're different," he managed, following her into the house. "People change, Richard." Camila's tone remained professionally polite, yet somehow the room temperature seemed to drop. Especially when they're forced to. The interior matched the exterior's elegance. Sophisticated furniture, carefully curated artwork, an atmosphere that whispered of professional success and refined taste. Richard felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Was it discomfort? Fear? "Where is—" He began to ask about the son he'd never met, but footsteps on the stairs interrupted him. A boy of about 10 appeared. The resemblance to Richard was unmistakable, the same eyes, the same jawline. But where Richard had learned arrogance from privilege, this child carried himself with earned confidence. "Mom, Attorney Thompson is on the phone," the boy said with remarkable poise. "He says the papers are ready." Camila nodded. "Tell him I'll be there in 5 minutes, Daniel." Richard watched the interaction, his unease growing. This wasn't how any of this was supposed to go. For 10 years, he'd imagined Camila struggling, perhaps waiting, maybe even hoping. The reality was infinitely more disturbing. "Sit down," Camila said, gesturing to a leather sofa. "I imagine you want to know why I agreed to see you after all these years." She positioned herself across from him, every movement calculated, every gesture deliberate. It felt less like a reunion and more like a cross-examination. Richard settled into the sofa, desperately trying to regain control of the situation. I was going through a difficult time back then, he began, launching into his prepared speech. The pressure from my family, the business, I was young and you were 28, Camilla interrupted, her smile sharp enough to cut. Old enough to run a corporation, but not old enough to take responsibility for fatherhood? The precision of her words made Richard flinch. Look, I know I made mistakes, he tried again, but I came here to make amends. I can help financially, pay for the boy's education, maybe even Daniel. Camilla's correction came like a whip crack. His name is Daniel. Your son has a name, Richard. He also has a medical history, food preferences, school grades, and nightmares that lasted 2 years because he couldn't understand why he didn't have a father. Each word landed like a physical blow. Richard shifted uncomfortably, his prepared apologies crumbling in the face of her surgical precision. I understand you're hurt, but Camilla stood and walked to a bookcase lined with diplomas and certificates. She selected a frame and turned it toward him. The photograph showed her receiving an award surrounded by distinguished colleagues. The plaque read, Michigan State Lawyer of the Year Civil Rights Specialist, 3 Supreme Court victories. Richard stared at the image, reality finally penetrating his assumptions. Camilla hadn't just survived without him, she had thrived spectacularly. That's impressive, he murmured. You sound shocked. Camilla replaced the frame with deliberate care. Let me guess. All these years you imagine me here, pining away, waiting for the great Richard Castillo to come back and rescue the poor black girl he left behind? The explicit racial dimension hit Richard like a slap. It had nothing to do with what? Camilla's laugh held no humor. With color. Funny how your family never had a problem with me being your special friend in college. But when we started talking about marriage, suddenly I became unsuitable for Castillo's social circles. Richard felt blood drain from his face. His mother's cruel words echoed in his memory. You can't introduce this girl to investors. Think of what the shareholders will say. An unplanned pregnancy, a lower-class wife. It would ruin your credibility. My mother may have had some reservations, he admitted weakly. Reservations? Camilla walked toward him, her eyes blazing with an intensity that made him instinctively recoil. Your mother called me the day after you left. Do you want to know what she said? Richard paled. He'd never known about that call. She said, and I quote, My dear, you're a smart girl. Surely you understand that Richard needs to marry someone suitable, someone who will contribute to his social advancement, not hinder it. The silence that followed was deafening. I didn't know about that call, Richard whispered. Of course not, you'd already made your choice. Camilla returned to her chair, once again in complete control. You know what was most interesting? 2 days after that call, I received a job offer from a law firm in Detroit. The starting salary was triple any other offer I'd received. Richard frowned, not understanding. The firm, Camilla continued with an enigmatic smile, belonged to one of your family's main competitors. Apparently, they were very interested in hiring a promising young lawyer who understood intimately how the business elite operated. The implications struck Richard like lightning. You worked against us? I worked for justice, Camilla corrected, and I discovered I had a natural talent for it, especially in cases involving corporations that abused their power against vulnerable people. Richard ran his hand through his hair, finally understanding the depth of his miscalculation. For a decade, he'd imagined Camilla as a victim. The truth was far more terrifying. Why did you agree to see me today? His voice betrayed his growing anxiety. Camilla's smile was predatory. Because, dear Richard, the time has come for you to discover what really happens when someone underestimates an intelligent black woman who has had 10 years to plan an appropriate response. Before he could process that veiled threat, Daniel appeared again at the top of the stairs. Mom, Mr. Thompson said all the documents have been filed with the court. The press has been notified. He wants to confirm we're going ahead with the press conference tomorrow at 2 p.m. Richard felt ice in his veins. Documents. Court, press, yes, confirm it, Camilla replied calmly. And call Thompson and Associates. Tell them Mr. Richard Castillo arrived right on time. The boy nodded and disappeared, leaving Richard alone with the dawning realization that he deliberately walked into a carefully constructed trap. Balance, think you know where this is going? The real shock is still ahead. What are you talking about? Richard's voice emerged higher than he'd intended. Camilla walked to the window, observing his BMW parked on the street. You drove 3 hours to get here, didn't you? You must be tired. How about some coffee while we wait? Wait for what? She turned, and for the first time since his arrival, her smile seemed genuinely cheerful. Come on, Richard. You didn't really think your visit today was a coincidence, did you? His blood ran cold. Throughout the entire conversation, he'd assumed he was in control, that he had chosen the moment of his return. Now he realized every move had been anticipated, every word carefully orchestrated. I came because I wanted to, he stammered. I'm sure that's exactly the impression you got, Camilla agreed with irony. After all, you were the one who decided to check my address, weren't you? You were the one who chose to come today, specifically today. Richard tried to remember the chain of events that had led him here. The chance encounter with a former colleague, the casual mention that Camilla still lived in the same place, the sudden need to resolve unfinished business. Had it all been manufactured? Every revelation you make, Camilla continued, clearly enjoying his discomfort, only confirms what I realized long ago. Men like you systematically underestimate women like me. And that arrogance always becomes your downfall. What are we waiting for? Richard asked again, but Camilla had already left the room. Alone, he stood and examined the photographs lining the walls. They weren't mere decoration, they were trophies of war. Camilla with families who had won lawsuits against major corporations. Camilla receiving awards for cases that changed legal precedent. Camilla at dinners with influential political figures. One photograph made his blood freeze. Camilla shaking hands with the state governor. The sign on the table read, Corporate Anti-Corruption Task Force Cases of Public Interest. Interesting, isn't it? Daniel's voice made him turn. The boy had descended the stairs silently. Mom always says walls tell better stories than words. Your mother is impressive, Richard admitted, genuinely shaken. She's always been like that, Daniel replied with obvious pride. Even when I was little, she would stay up late studying cases, taking notes. She said she was building something special. The doorbell rang. Daniel rushed to answer it, and Richard heard familiar voices in the entryway, voices that made him instinctively step backward. Camilla, dear, we're right on time, said an authoritative male voice. Perfect, Marcus. The guest of honor is already here. Richard's legs weakened when he recognized the voice of Marcus Thompson, one of the most renowned civil rights attorneys in the country. If Thompson was involved, this was far bigger than a simple conversation between ex-spouses. 3 people entered. Besides Thompson, there was an elegant woman Richard vaguely recognized from news broadcasts, a prosecutor known for prosecuting corrupt businessmen, and a younger man carrying recording equipment. Richard Castillo. Thompson extended his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We finally meet in person. I don't understand, Richard stammered, mechanically shaking the offered hand. Of course you do, the prosecutor interjected. I'm Patricia Wells. I'm sure you remember me. After all, you tried to bribe me just 6 months ago. Richard's world began collapsing. He vaguely recalled a dinner in Washington, an informal conversation about interpretive flexibility in environmental regulations, a discreet offer to finance campaigns for aligned candidates. That was just small talk, he stammered. Recorded, Wells smiled, producing a small device from her pocket. Totally legal since you were in a public space discussing matters affecting the collective interest. Camilla returned carrying a thick folder. Richard, I'd like to officially introduce my team. 2 years ago, when we learned you were planning to expand operations to Michigan, we began carefully documenting your business practices. What practices? Richard tried to maintain composure, but his voice betrayed desperation. Thompson opened his briefcase. Bribery of public officials, violation of environmental laws, systematic discrimination in hiring practices, tax avoidance through offshore havens. Shall I continue? Richard looked around the room, finally realizing he was completely surrounded. This is a conspiracy? No, Camilla corrected calmly. This is justice. For 10 years, you built your empire by trampling on people like me, people you considered disposable, people you thought would never have the power to retaliate. The young man with the recording equipment activated a discreet camera. Mr. Castillo, I'm James Rodriguez from the Detroit Tribune. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the allegations being formalized today. I won't answer anything without my lawyer, Richard managed to articulate. Smart, Wells agreed. You'll need several actually. We have 3 different jurisdictions interested in your business: federal, state, and municipal. Alarm clock, the clock is ticking. And Richard's empire is about to crumble. Camilla sat back down, now clearly commanding the situation as if it were her courtroom. Remember when you left me, Richard? You said I wasn't suited to your corporate world, that I lacked the necessary sophistication. Richard felt himself sinking into quicksand. Every attempt to defend himself only buried him deeper. All these years, Camilla continued, you assumed I had disappeared from your radar, that I was here languishing, raising our son in obscurity. But do you know what really happened? She picked up a tablet and showed him a series of newspaper articles. Civil rights expert defeats agribusiness giant, lawyer obtains largest environmental damages award in state history, business elite, family loses landmark racial discrimination case. Richard read the headlines with growing horror. In every case, the defeated corporations were clients, partners, or subsidiaries of his own company. Every victory against people like you brought me more credibility, Camilla explained with obvious satisfaction. More connections, more power, and the most ironic part, you indirectly financed my professional growth. How? Richard asked, though he feared the answer. Thompson smiled knowingly. Every lawsuit your ex-wife won against your companies generated millions in damages. 15% in attorney's fees multiplied by dozens of cases. Well, you can do the math. The irony was devastating. Richard had inadvertently financed the rise of the woman now orchestrating his downfall. But why today? He asked desperately. Why now? Camilla glanced at her watch. Because today at 2:30 p.m. your company is announcing its merger with Whitman Industries. An $8 billion merger that depends entirely on your unblemished reputation as CEO. All color drained from Richard's face. The merger was his life's work, the deal that would cement his status as one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. At 2:25 p.m., Camilla continued impassively, Prosecutor Wells will formally announce federal charges against you. At 2:26 p.m., Thompson will file a civil suit for damages on behalf of dozens of discriminated employees. At 2:27 p.m., the Detroit Tribune will publish an exclusive report with compromising recordings. And at 2:30 p.m., Wells concluded with obvious satisfaction, when your company tries to announce the merger, it will discover there is no longer a company worth merging with. Richard slumped in his chair, finally understanding the magnitude of the orchestration. Every move had been calculated with surgical precision. Every timing, every detail, every revelation, all designed for maximum destructive impact. 10 years, he muttered. You've been planning this for 10 years. No, Camilla corrected, standing and walking to the window where his luxury car sat gleaming in the sunlight. I spent 10 years building this. They joined me in the last 2 years when they realized you had committed federal crimes. Daniel came down the stairs again, now carrying a school backpack. Mom, can I go to Tommy's house? I want to watch the news there. Of course, my love, call me when you arrive. The boy kissed Camilla on the cheek and left, completely ignoring Richard as if he were part of the furniture. He doesn't know who I am, Richard observed in a broken voice. He knows exactly who you are, Camilla replied coldly. The man who abandoned his family and is now being prosecuted for federal crimes. Exactly the person he was raised not to become. At 2:24 p.m., Richard's cell phone began vibrating incessantly. Calls from the company, lawyers, investors. He ignored them all, still trying to process what was about to happen. 1 minute, Wells announced, consulting her watch with military precision. Richard jumped from his chair. I have to go. I need to cancel the press conference. Postpone the merger? Sit down, Thompson ordered with an authority that made Richard obey instinctively. You're not going anywhere. At 2:25 p.m. sharp, Wells called her assistant. You can announce it, she said simply. Within seconds, Richard's phone exploded with notifications. His secretary, desperate. Mr. Castillo, the federal prosecutor has just announced criminal charges against you. Whitman's investors are canceling everything. How long, James? Camilla asked the journalist. 30 seconds to online publication, he replied, typing furiously on his laptop. Richard tried to stand again, but his legs wouldn't respond. Panic had completely taken over. You can't do this. I have a family, employees, thousands of people depend on me. Like my family depended on you 10 years ago, Camilla interrupted, her voice ice. Like the black employees you systematically fired depended on corporate justice? Thompson opened his tablet, showing real-time notifications. Civil lawsuit filed. 43 employees represented, documenting systematic racial discrimination between 2018 and 2024. No, Richard shook his head desperately. This can't be happening. Oh, but it is, Wells smiled. And we have recordings of your conversations at the country club, explaining your strategic hiring policies to maintain the cultural quality of the company. James' tablet showed the first headline. Multi-billionaire Imperial CEO accused of racial discrimination and bribery within minutes. The news was spreading across all platforms. Richard picked up his phone with trembling hands, trying to call his personal lawyer. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried the CFO. Same result. His own board of directors was ignoring his calls. $50 million, Thompson said casually, reading stock market updates. That's how much your company has lost in value in the last 3 minutes. The house phone rang. Camilla answered with studied calm. Yes, he's here. No, he won't be giving any interviews today, I understand. Thank you. CNN wants an official statement, she informed Richard with obvious satisfaction. Apparently, the hashtag #Richard Castillo racist is already trending on Twitter. Richard checked his social media and felt his world completely collapse. Screenshots of his internal emails were being shared thousands of times. Conversations where he referred to black employees as problematic and unsuitable for growth. Messages where he instructed HR to find creative reasons to fire them. How did you get access to my private emails? He asked, his voice breaking. Whistleblower report, Wells explained. Your own executive assistant, Janet Morrison, recorded your discriminatory instructions for 2 years. She approached us 6 months ago. The name hit Richard like a punch. Janet, who had worked with him for a decade, who knew all his corporate secrets, whom he had always treated like invisible furniture. Janet is, he began. Black, Camilla finished, and tired of being called the cleaning lady when she accompanied you to meetings, despite having an MBA in finance. James' tablet showed real-time updates. Company shares in freefall, investors pulling out. Employees posting on social media about experiences of discrimination. At 2:30 p.m., just as he was about to announce the biggest merger of his career, Richard watched his company disintegrate live on television. The reporter commented, in a dramatic turn of events, the $8 billion merger has been canceled after revelations of systematic discriminatory practices. $200 million, Thompson updated. Your personal loss so far? Richard buried his face in his hands. Why did you do this? Camilla stood and walked over to him. For the first time since his arrival, her expression softened slightly. Because for 10 years, you built an empire by trampling on people like me. Because you believed that black women existed only to be discarded when they became inconvenient. Because you never imagined we could become powerful enough to retaliate. She bent down to be at eye level with him, and mainly because you set a dangerous precedent, Richard. How many other women like me have been abandoned by men like you? How many other employees have been discriminated against by arrogant executives? The phone rang again. This time it was Richard's mother, hysterical. What have you done? They're saying on television that you're a criminal? While Richard tried to explain the inexplicable to his collapsing family, Camilla watched with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had executed the perfect plan. Thompson closed his tablet. Justice is served. No, Camilla corrected, still watching Richard's devastation. Justice is when the consequences finally catch up with those who thought they were above them. Flexed biceps, but the story doesn't end with Richard's fall. The real lesson is still to come. 6 months later, Richard sat in a cramped one-bedroom apartment watching the Women Who Make a Difference awards ceremony on television. The contrast to his former penthouse was stark and humiliating. Camilla took the stage wearing an elegant blue dress, receiving thunderous applause. Her transformation from abandoned wife to celebrated civil rights champion was complete. Attorney Camilla Johnson has not only revolutionized the fight for civil rights, the presenter announced, but has demonstrated that true justice requires patience, strategy, and unwavering courage. Daniel, now studying at an elite private school financed by his mother's legal fees, watched proudly from the audience. At 10 years old, he had learned that real strength comes not from money or connections, but from integrity and determination. Richard's company had declared complete bankruptcy. The federal lawsuits resulted in $50 million in fines and 2 years of house arrest. But more devastating than any court penalty was the utter loneliness. Friends, family, colleagues, all had abandoned him when they realized that association with his name was toxic to any reputation. Janet Morrison, his former assistant, now ran her own business consulting firm, specializing in detecting discriminatory corporate practices. Her first clients were Richard's competitors, eager to prove they operated differently. Camila had turned her personal victory into a national movement. Her firm, now with 15 lawyers, became a benchmark in racial discrimination cases. The renovated house became a symbol, proof that Black women can not only survive abandonment but build empires on the ashes of betrayal. "Revenge is a dish best served with strategy," she had said in a recent interview. "It's not about destroying those who have hurt you, but about building something so great that it renders any damage they tried to cause irrelevant." Richard watched it all on television, finally understanding the magnitude of his arrogance. He had underestimated not only Camila but an entire generation of women who turned injustice into fuel for greatness. The phone rang, his mother calling for the first time in months. "Son, I saw her interview. You have every reason to be proud of the woman she became, even if you lost the right to be by her side." Richard hung up and looked at an old photograph, him, Camila, and newborn Daniel. A family he had destroyed out of pride and prejudice disguised as ambition. The painful truth crystallized. While he had built an empire based on exploitation and discrimination, Camila had built a legacy based on justice and social transformation. The contrast could not have been more brutal or more deserved. 10 years of meticulous planning had taught him a lesson that would echo forever. Underestimating an intelligent, determined woman is not just stupidity. It is guaranteeing your own destruction. The best revenge, he discovered too late, is not to repay the damage suffered. It is to achieve such absolute success that any attempt to diminish it becomes irrelevant. On the television screen, Camila held her award high. "This is for every woman who was told she wasn't enough," she said, her voice strong and clear. "For every person who was underestimated because of their race, their background, their circumstances. You are enough, you are powerful, and your story is not over." Richard turned off the television and sat in the darkness of his small apartment. Somewhere in the city, Camila was celebrating. Daniel was proud. A community was uplifted. And he was alone. Justice, he finally understood, is not always swift. But when it comes, it is complete. This story is about more than revenge. It's about the transformative power of resilience. It's about how pain can become purpose, how humiliation can forge strength, and how those who are underestimated can rise to heights their oppressors never imagined. Camila didn't just defeat Richard, she transcended him. She built something that will outlast his temporary empire, a legacy of justice, a firm that protects the vulnerable, a son who knows his worth. In a world where there are still many Richards, people who believe power gives them the right to discard others, we need to celebrate every Camila who has the courage to prove that true greatness knows no color, no social class, no limitations imposed by those who fear the power of justice. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or made you think differently about justice and redemption, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more stories that matter, stories of resilience, transformation, and the unstoppable power of those who refuse to be defeated. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you witnessed someone transform their pain into power? Your story matters too. Turn on notifications so you never miss our next powerful story of triumph against the odds. Remember, your circumstances do not define your destiny. Your response to them does. Thank you for reading Camila's story. May it inspire you to build something great from whatever challenges you face.